So, Shabbat Shalom, everybody. I'm so out of the habit of preaching. The Torah portion for this week is called Kedoshim. And the word Kadosh, I know you all know, means holiness. Its placement is really quite puzzling in a way in where it is in the Torah, because if you look at all the sections surrounding it, both before and after, they're all filled with detailed instructions to the priest, basically, of how to offer the various sacrifices. Suddenly, though, as though it were an oasis in a preaching desert, there appears to be this set of magnificent verses instructing the people, the priests, not the priest rather, but the people, how to behave. In fact, the text is very clear. Daber el kol adat b'nei Yisrael. Speak to all of the people of Israel and tell them, it's not just for the priests. Holy shall you be, everyone, for I, the Lord your God, am holy. Now, some of the instructions are, of course, ritual, such as observing the Sabbath, etc. But most of them are what we would consider to be moral, living instructions. The verses should be pretty familiar to you, actually, because we read them every year on Yom Kippur. Don't swear falsely. Don't defraud your neighbor. Don't insult the deaf or put a stumbling block before the blind. Don't keep a worker's wages overnight. Leave the corner of your field unharvested so the poor can have it. Love your neighbor as yourself. One could easily choose any one of these verses and have enough material for probably a dozen or more sermons. But I want to focus on just two words that are not an instruction that is repeated throughout the portion. Because at the end of each section where the instructions are given, the words Ani Adonai appear. I am God. And they were, of course, reflect the opening verse, holy shall you be, for I, the Lord, your God, am holy. Now, these words, I think, are an attempt to link us to God through our behavior. I think that's the simple message. Holiness, after all, is the essential attribute of God in Jewish thought and probably most religious thought. We don't know exactly what it means because it's never officially defined. The best we can do is learn from the word itself, because the original meaning of this word is simply to set something apart. You would set something or someone apart. But in the case of this word as it comes to mean holy, it doesn't just mean to set apart. It means to set above. Set apart by setting above. So the text, in a sense, then, is calling us to imitate God's essential nature of holiness simply by lifting our behavior to a higher level, a level beyond what I would guess we would say is normal self-interest. And I've thought a lot about how observing these instructions can accomplish that. What's the idea behind it? So after rereading them 30 or 40 times, I think I found the organizing principle, and it's based on an understanding of human nature itself. Human nature, biologically, human nature is based on what? Self-preservation. It's biologically, as I said, built into us. Our natural tendency is to do that which is what? In our own best interest, regardless, necessarily, of the implications to others. That's the norm, in a sense. That's the ordinary, doing what is good for us. In fact, if you look at this sentence, to love your neighbor as yourself, it says it pretty clearly, doesn't it? Doesn't it assume the default setting of loving ourselves, to do that's what is in our best interest? The call to holy behavior, then, is the call, in a sense, to set that idea to the side and somehow rise above it. If lying is in my best interest because it'll get me out of trouble, then I should lie. It's survival. If harvesting the entire field will give me more profit, why would I leave any of it for somebody else? If keeping the worker's wage overnight gives me one more day of interest, isn't it just human nature to do that and make more money? But God's concern is not just for you or me or any individual. God's concern is for all of humanity, not just some of it. Recall the Midrash in which the people of Israel are chastised at the Red Sea for rejoicing in the death of the Egyptians, their enemy. God is destroying them. But when the people rejoice at their death, in the Midrash, God calls out to the people and says, "My children are dying. How dare you rejoice?" It's not just you, it's all human beings are children of God. So the call for us to be holy then, I think, is the call for us to curb some of those biological instincts, which would naturally lead us to think only of ourselves, and instead call on what I would call our spiritual instincts, which lead us to think of others as well as ourselves. That's why we don't withhold the worker's wage, why we don't curse the deaf, or don't put a stumbling block, before the blind. You might say it's what makes us more than just animals. When I think about the injunction to set aside the corner of the field for the poor and hungry, I can't help but contrast it with a picture on the Animal Channel of a pack of animals that make a kill. It's very clear. The powerful get there first and take all they want. The rest of the pack sneaks in to get a pick at it now and then, but are driven back at every attempt. Contrast that with intentionally leaving some of the field for the poor. Let me remind you that the essence of Judaism, in my sense at least, lies in the word mitzvah. What's a mitzvah? Is it a good deed, a nice gesture? At some level, yes. In Orthodox Judaism, a mitzvah is a commandment, something you have to do. It covers everything you do, from the food you eat, the clothes you wear, the order in which you spend your day, starting and ending your day with prayer. But that doesn't work for Reform Jews, does it? So it's different. So I like to define the word mitzvah as sacred obligation. That which I do because it recognizes that there is something sacred other than just me that calls upon me to look beyond just myself as I live my life and as I make decisions. Even if one doubts the existence of God or even denies the existence of God, living with a sense of sacred obligation that there is something just as important as me that I am obligated to, isn't that part of the definition of being Jewish? Mitzvah, then, is what leads us to holiness. So it's not some mysterious state of euphoria described in contemplation on the top of a mountain. Holiness is how we are supposed to live each and every day. It's following a code of behavior that recognizes that we are not only biological beings, but also moral and spiritual beings as well. Holiness is something we may come to the sanctuary to study and learn and understand and seek inspiration for. But holiness is not achieved in this sanctuary. It is achieved out there in the world when you leave. It's when we live in this manner that I believe it makes this Shabbat's Torah portion come to life, by following God's command to be holy. Being holy is simply lifting ourselves up beyond the ordinary, out of just our biological selves' needs, and into our higher and moral selves. And so I pray, Ken Yehi Ratzon, we know this is God's will. Please, God, let it be ours as well. Amen. Shabbat Shalom.